July is the month when my garden is positively blooming, from flowers in the borders to produce in the veg patch. It's the gift that just keeps on giving. But there are a number of key jobs and projects that need to be done to keep it looking good. So let's get started. This is the longest and the deepest border in my garden. It's filled with a mixture of shrubs, roses and border perennials, all carefully contoured. But in order to keep it looking good, there's one job I need to do on a regular basis, and I love doing it: deadheading. One plant that really repays deadheading is the rose. It doesn't matter what sort of rose it is. This is a lovely old rose called Rosamundi with these stripy flowers, dates back centuries, and it produces clusters of bloom, but the flower in the centre of the group always opens first, and obviously that's always the one that fades first. So the thing to do is to get your secateurs and just snip it out. Learn to differentiate between a flower that's faded and a flower that's in bud and still coming. It's fairly obvious when you look at them. They're really fresh and just bursting with promise, whereas the flower that's gone over will look distinctly faded. You're just taking it out right at the bottom of its stalk, so you'd hardly know it was there. It's quite addictive, I have to tell you, and then you can come back in a few days' time and do a few more. What it also does is stops the plant wasting energy making seeds on that faded flower. Then when all this cluster have gone, I'll take that stem right back down here, so it encourages fresh young growth. And in some roses, particularly those that repeat flower, Rosamundi doesn't, but in others it will encourage them to carry on producing blooms right the way through the summer, instead of giving up making seeds and saying, "My work's done here, I'm finished now." Oh, no, you're not. I want more colour from my plants. Other plants might just have one flush of flower, you'll never get any more, but you can clean up the plant a bit, make it look better and conserve its energy so that it's going into the leaves, down into the root for next year's blooms. The peony is one such. You get one flush on peonies, then they start to go brown, so whip them off back lower down to a leaf. Just above that leaf there, then you've not got unsightly stalks sticking up in the air, but what you are doing is producing a plant which looks so much better. There are two flowers on this stalk, one's faded, one hasn't, so leave the one that hasn't and just take off the faded one. Just work through your borders like this every few days. Not only will they look better, but it's also a very good way of getting to know your plants and how they grow. If your border's new, or in my case there are gaps at the front, the easiest thing to do is just to go carefully between the plants with a hoe. Remembering you're skimming, not digging. You're separating the top of the plant from its roots. And when you've done that, let them dry in the sun for a while, before really soaking the soil. And then you can lay a 2-inch deep mulch, something like chipped ornamental bark. That will help seal in the moisture and keep down any subsequent weed growth. Another thing that tends to happen in your beds and borders is that plants flop. Not all of them are sturdy enough to hold themselves upright. Things like alströmerias and the taller hardy geraniums just love to flop over your path and your lawn, and it's very irritating. There are various ways of corralling them. These supports here are made of powder coated steel. It has these uprights which have got little bobbles on the top. They look decorative, they're also useful. They stop you catching your eye on them when you're bending down. And then this single arc here which will stop plants from flopping forward. You can get these in different heights, some will be lower, some higher, and use the one that suits the ultimate height of the plant you're growing. Peonies tend to flop as well, and the classic peony support looks like this. Here you've got 3 legs and then a circle at the top with crisscross wires. The idea is to put this in place before the plant grows through it, and then it'll be well supported and you won't see it. Don't try and push it on the plant once it's come up this high, because it's going to damage it. So when you see the plant coming up, get this in over the top, sturdily placed into the ground. It will then grow up through it, and eventually the support will disappear but be doing its job. You don't necessarily have to get elaborate shop-bought supports. You can make your own. Here I've supported these delphiniums with just steel rods with a bobble on the top, and between them all I've run string so that when the delphiniums grow up through that string, the crisscross pattern will help support them. Sometimes if you tie delphiniums individually to a cane, where they're tied, if a strong wind comes, it can just snap them off. I prefer to allow them a little more movement, but they're still held in place by these strings, and I'll make them higher up as the stems elongate. It's just a case of right support for the right plant, crucially at the right time, before it's grown too tall. No matter how hard you try, there are always gaps popping up in your beds and borders, often at the front, and that's exactly where you see them, isn't it? Now, grey soil is not attractive. It's very important for growing plants, but even its mother wouldn't call it beautiful. So the thing to do is to work it over slightly with a trowel and just enrich it a bit. I've really soaked these in lead pots. Look at that. It's ready for a new home, isn't it? In the hole. Pull back the earth. Firmly hit it with my fingers. I'm planting it just a little bit deeper than it's been in the pot, so that all the root ball is entirely covered. And in front of it, the osteo. Into the hole, fill around it, and just make sure there are no air gaps. And you think about what that looked like before, just a rather dreary hole, and then instant satisfaction. There are lots of plants at the front of the beds and borders here that I've popped in, things like the creeping dead nettle, that lamium on the corner there. But the thing I love most is the sea thrift, the sea pink, armeria, on the corner of the footpath. Seems to like it there. They're all giving me, if you like, an introduction to the border. Rather than it not starting until 3 feet in, the border comes right down to the edge of the lawn, and your garden is all the better for being fully furnished. The thing you must always remember about roses is they are greedy plants. They're going to produce flowers for you probably right the way through the summer. They need energy, they need oomph, and that means they need plenty of moisture and plenty of food at the roots. What do you use to give your soil that oomph? Lashings of garden compost, if you got it, the stuff you've rotted down on your heap, that will help. Anything organic to hold on to moisture, and food. You can get special compost, rose, tree and shrub compost. Work in as much of that as you can to make sure that what you're feeling is almost like fruitcake, really rich, really beneficial. It's money in the bank when it comes to flowering. Heavy clay soil has always been traditionally good for roses. It's the moisture content that they love. On light sandy soils they can be very poor, very mingy and get mildew and black spot more readily. So be generous with the soil improver when you're growing them in beds and borders, and they will repay your care and attention by flowering profusely with that constant supply of moisture. What's special about that sort of mix? It's been formulated to suit the purpose. There'll be food in there as well as organic enrichment which holds on to the moisture and gives you feel. When it comes to growing roses in pots, they need a more concentrated compost. I like to use this, John Innes number 3. John Innes is a formula that was worked out in the 1930s, a combination of loam, peat and sand in those days. Nowadays we keep the loam, we keep the sand, but we replace the peat with rotted organic matter. And the thing about this compost is it's much more stable, it's much more weighty, it hangs on to nutrition far longer because it's got loam in it, and that for me is exactly what the roses need. I've put some in the base of the pot, not quite half full. You need to judge it by the depth of the pot. Water your rose in its container before you plant so it's really saturated, because if it's dry and you put it in there, it's then difficult to wet with a hose pipe. Put your hand around it, turn it upside down and then slip it out of its pot. Now this is a really good container grown rose because you can see there's enough root in there. It's come out to the edge of the pot, but it's not completely root bound. You know, you can't see compost, all you can see is root. Now this is the rootstock onto which the variety has been grafted. You want to make sure that that is underneath the soil surface so you can plant to about that deep, and by doing that you'll get more rooting out of the base of these varietal stems, if you like, and that makes the plant even more stable and it stops it rocking around. So I'm lowering it in, and I can make sure that when I've finished potting it, the compost is just above that particular junction between the rootstock and the variety. If you're wondering what this variety is, it's one called Tottering by Gently, named after a comic strip at the back of Country Life. It's the prettiest, most delicate, pale yellow flower. Lots of them. There's only 1 or 2 on this because it's a young plant, but there's much more to come. It takes a while, but as you're going along, just firm it in with your fingers. You don't have to ram it. When I worked in parks growing chrysanthemums, we had to ram the compost in with a length of broom handle because it was believed that that made for better plants. It made no difference at all, really. As long as there are no air pockets in there, you're fine. People do get nervous about roses, generally at pruning time in winter, thinking, oh, how hard back do I cut it? Well, roses prove the truth in the old adage that growth follows the knife, meaning the harder you cut something back, the more vigorously it will grow, and that's certainly true in the case of roses. Don't get hung up on pruning, and don't let it put you off growing roses. They're so beautiful, and again, if they're in a spot where they don't look terribly happy, like all garden plants, you can always move them. A friend of mine had it sussed. He said the thing about roses, he said, is that roses grow in spite of their owners, and that's very true. Just plant them well in good compost at the right depth, and I've left there a gap of about 1.5 inches. Don't ever pot anything with the compost right up to the rim of the pot, for the obvious reason that it will be very difficult then to water it, because you put water on, it'll just run straight off. By leaving that much, you can fill up the pot with water and it will go down. Remembering, as I told you before, 1 inch of water generally travels down about 9 inches. So by leaving a good 1.5 inches in, nearly 2 inches, I'll make sure that when I top this up with water, it will then go right the way down to the bottom, and the plant will enjoy that. So, firmly potted, gap left to allow the water to fill up the pot. Now, there is one tip here which I've ignored, and I would tell you to do it, and that is, before you water the plant, put it in its final spot. Then you don't have to lug it all the way there with soggy compost. Now you'll notice at the moment the drainage is so good in here, which is really important. It is not going to fill right to the rim because it's soaking up quite quickly. But as that compost gets harder and more compacted over the summer, so it will drain more slowly, and that's why you need that gap, so you can fill right to the top and then go away while it's draining down. There we are, and it's such a lovely moment. You're starting off a healthy, well-branched rose on its life of giving you pleasure. I always like this moment, and I shall look forward to that right the way through the summer. Plenty of buds to come. The first thing to think about is what's the best time of day to water, and the answer there is early in the morning or in the evening, because then the water will go into action and evaporate less rapidly than it would in a hot noonday sun. Don't do your watering according to the calendar. Regularly, every single day, if it's been pouring down and if it's cool, the water will be lost from the soil much more slowly than on a hot, dry day, when with containers in particular, on really hot summer days, you may be watering both morning and evening. Use your common sense, not the clock. If you're going on holiday, that really is a tricky time. By far the best thing to do is to get a neighbour or a friend to come in, having given them a bit of instruction on how often they are likely to have to water. Go along with your feelings and your experience and pass it on to them. Then you can go away without worrying about the plants back home. I wonder if they're all dying. As a general rule of thumb, it's good to make plants search out their own water supply, particularly in beds and borders. But you'll notice the moment comes where they're starting to wilt, they're starting to be under stress, and that's the time to act. Ideally, obviously, before that. How can you tell when they're going to need water? Look at the soil. Don't just look at the soil, but feel and examine the soil. If you look at a border and it looks dry on top, it may still be moist underneath. Get your trowel out, just dig down a couple of inches. If soil looks like a freshly wrung out flannel and feels damp, it's got enough water in it. So how do you water? Well, let me show you first how not to water. This is how not to water, because you go out there on a sunny day and you think, oh, that's right, I give the plants a really good soak. And you're not giving them a really good soak, you're just putting water on the leaves and flowers, and it's going to evaporate from those leaves and flowers before it goes where it's needed. I'm sorry, it sounds as if I'm talking to children, doesn't it? But you know, I see people watering like this and think, no, get it down there. It doesn't matter if you catch the foliage a bit, it'll sort of freshen them up. You can watch the water sinking down into the soil and knowing it's going where it's needed. Try and put the water really quite close to the plant. Roots on things like this cosmos, which has only been in here a week, which is why I'm watering it, don't spread that far. So you can do most good by getting the water in the little arc of earth immediately around the plant. When you've got really established plants in the border and they've been in 2 or 3 years, try to avoid watering them unless they are really clearly in distress because it's been dry for weeks. When it comes to container plants, you really are playing God, because although rain can fall down, it won't really water them terribly well. It will hit the foliage and generally run off. All this canopy here, particularly on this hosta, is like an umbrella. It's stopping the rain getting to the compost and the roots where it's needed. Some of it will run down the leaf stalks, but the majority of it will be thrown off to one side. So you've got to make sure that your pot plants in particular outdoors on a hot terrace in the summer don't dry out. Use your fingers, get down there, dig into the compost, use your fingers to scoop down underneath. Look at that, it's perfectly damp down there. It doesn't actually need any more water. So if it's damp 2 inches down, leave it alone. If it's dry, give it a really good soak. And with plants like the hosta that love moisture, to be honest, you can't really overwater them. Just keep soaking them. And I'm watering here in the middle of the plant because that's going to get straight down into the compost. No point in watering there because you can see what happens when the rain falls. It just runs off. Here, it's going right where it's needed. If you're in and out and you often can't get to water your containers, grow pelargoniums. They don't mind being left dry for several days. The thing that'll finish them off is soggy compost. That's fine. It's really important that we don't waste water and that we use it in the right way, because if we don't, we can do more harm than good. Do install as many water butts as you possibly can on your downpipes. They'll capture the rainfall and you can use that to water your plants. Don't waste water on the lawn. The grass is the first thing to suffer in drought because it has shallow roots, but it's also the first thing to recover in a shower of rain. There are more important places to use water. When it comes to equipment, do make sure you've got a good hose pipe. There is nothing more irritating than a hose pipe which keeps kinking. One way of avoiding that is with a really good hose reel. It makes sure that the hose pipe is wound round and round rather than doing as they often do, just kinking and stopping the flow. You'll find sprinkler heads with different settings. Some offer a spray, others a jet. And generally for most watering, a good sprinkler head that applies it gently is the best option. For shelves in the greenhouse, or for hanging baskets that are up high, a lance fitted to the end of the hosepipe will give you that extra bit of reach, and it does make for an easier job. For larger areas of garden, like newly planted beds and borders and the veg patch, plug your hosepipe into an oscillating sprinkler that goes back and forth, applying a soft and gentle flow of water that really will soak down into the soil. Leave it running in any one spot for about half an hour. More control means using less water. So be considerate and considered about your watering. Do it at the right time of day, to the right plants, in the right place and the right amount. That way your plants will be happy and so will your bank balance. Today is an exciting day on my veg patch because it's time to harvest one of my favourite crops, to unearth what I hope will be buried treasure. Now, as you can see, there's been a heck of a lot of growth in here. It's been a challenging year for veg because they like to keep growing continuously, but these really hot spells have meant I've had to do quite a lot of irrigation just to keep the moisture in the soil and stop a lot of things running to seed. But the onions are keeping on growing. I've sown a lot of flowers. We've got borage here, we've got marigolds to bring in the pollinators. But the buried treasure I want to unearth, hoping it's there, just round here. Now, you may remember that back in April I planted what we called seed potatoes, Charlottes, and I planted them in rows on the veg patch where they've done really quite well. But I also planted 5 seed potatoes in each of these 3 sacks here, showing what you could do with a potato bag if you've got no space at all for a veg patch. I just added more compost as the shoots grow out of the top, filling it up that little bit higher. There's a good amount of foliage on each of these bags, so the indication would be that there might be a decent crop underneath. Generally speaking, it's time to harvest in the row when the plants are flowering. There are no flowers on here at all, but I'm still convinced that down in there, I'm hoping, there will be a decent crop of spuds, and they'll all be lovely and edible and succulent as opposed to nasty and green. Just a quick reminder to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. This is a growing community for people who know nothing about gardening but want to learn, and for those who are more experienced, so come and join us. What I have done is made sure I didn't let them dry out, even so they're still quite heavy. I want to try and use these bags again, so I'm not going to slit them. The bees are very interested. I'm just going to tip it out if it'll come, bash it about a bit, and then wish me luck. Out it comes. Have we got? And oh, look! There we are. I don't reckon that's going to be a bad crop. I put in 5 seed potatoes, which would have cost me, it was £2.99 for 10, so I'll call it £1.50. Now let's see what I get. It's a childlike feeling. It's what gardening's all about. It's that moment of truth, but also of satisfaction, of knowing that this is a crop that wouldn't exist unless you'd grown it, that will taste far better than anything you buy in the shops. Now, I know potatoes are quite cheap, but you know, when you take a homegrown one like this and pop it in the pan within minutes of it being harvested, and there's that great sense of satisfaction, of achievement. You know, new potatoes are such beautiful things, aren't they? Isn't it amazing how much pleasure you can just get out of knowing that they didn't exist back in April and now in July, here they are, a good square meal. Such a lot, look, on and on and on. I'm not complaining. I grew my first potatoes when I was probably about 10. I was probably just into double figures, and it was magical. The ludicrous thing is, all these years on, I still get exactly the same thrill as I did when I was 10 from uprooting my first crop of potatoes. I suppose some people might think it's rather pathetic, rather childish. But for me, it's the stuff of life. It's not childish at all. It's the most basic of pleasures, of human endeavours, of growing something to feed yourself with. And it wipes away all the sort of sophistication of modern life. And you think, if life is about feeding yourself, which it is really, both spiritually and physically, then harvesting potatoes is a wonderful sort of token gesture about the purity of it all. 5 little spuds planted in a sack of compost, and I've got out of it, gosh, half a dozen meals for me and Mrs. T. So, success with the spuds, but let me show you some other things you can be doing through the summer to keep your veg garden cropping right the way through until autumn. If you have trained fruit trees in your garden, like these step-over apples, you need to summer prune them to concentrate their efforts into making flower buds and fruits next year, rather than these long vegetative growths that are here. We don't need these, so snip them back to round about 2 inches just above a leaf. That'll concentrate the tree's energy on making next year's blossom. If you have rows of crops, run a hoe between them, lightly skimming across the surface, being careful not to damage, in this case, my onions, but just skimming off any annual weed growth. That'll make sure it dries in the sun and allows the crop itself to mature unimpeded. And then, of course, there are your tomato plants. You may remember that I started with the tomatoes outside. I didn't know what the summer was going to be like when I planted them, and I wanted to make sure they cropped. So I moved them into here when the seedlings had gone. I thought I might as well get the tomatoes into the greenhouse. 2 plants in the growing bag. They've gone ape. What I need to do now, and we do it with all tomatoes, is to thin out the lower foliage to let a bit more air and a degree of light get around the crop that's developing. So some of these leaves which are in here, I'm simply going to snip off. You don't need to do as the old gardeners used to do, denude it right the way up. I'm not doing that. But if I cut some of this lower foliage off with a pair of sharp secateurs, you'll be able to see the first crop. Yeah, for all the good times, aren't you? Now, I'm just going to take this off. If you look at the stalk of the tomato, you'll see the swollen bit there. Now what I'm going to do is put my finger against that, press into it and pull it away, twisting it so it breaks at that point. There we are, and that's how it's meant to be picked. It's not a perfect tomato, but it's sun warmed, it smells delicious, and it'll do me for my tea. Back in April, I sowed this little raised bed with salad crops, mesclun, mizuna, rocket, lettuce. It all came up beautifully. We harvested it for weeks, but there comes a point where it goes over the hill. It gets too big, it's more acrid tasting, and you think, cut your losses, Alan, pull it all out, pop it on the compost heap and re-sow. I topped up with a bit of fresh compost on the top, and then I sowed just 2 weeks ago, looking at the label here, lettuce, radishes, mustard and coriander, and I've left a gap in the middle to sow some more mizuna. So, same way as before. It's lovely moist compost. I'm just pressing this cane into the surface to make a little tiny furrow. It doesn't need to be more than 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep, about 1 centimetre. And I'm going to sprinkle them quite thinly along the row. And if they come up too thickly, though with these little thin leaved crops it doesn't really matter. You just leave them all in and don't bother to thin them. And then with your fingers just lightly flick back the soil. You're not burying them terribly deeply. Flick back the soil over that little furrow until the seeds just disappear. I shall water that in now and then look forward to a succession of crops. And that's the joy of a veg patch. There's always something happening, there's always something coming to maturity. And as with most things in gardening, anticipation is half the fun. So how can you tell if your plant needs a feed? You'll notice that your plants in containers, whether they're in a greenhouse or outdoors in the garden, will start to run out of steam in sort of June, July. They've exhausted the food in the compost. The leaves will become a bit more pale, and also the flowers will start to ease off. They'll become smaller and fewer in number. And you know then that what they need is a darn good meal. From about May onwards, all container grown plants can be given a dilute liquid feed once a week if you're generous, and certainly once a fortnight, right the way through the year when they're actively growing. When you see the shelves in the garden centre, oh my goodness, it's like looking at a supermarket. More kinds of liquid feed than you can shake a trowel at. I like to go for an organic feed because I'm an organic gardener. Organic feeds feed soil bacteria, which is vital to keep a healthy garden. And that would always be the choice for me. You can get ones which are more suited to tomatoes and fruiting plants because they're higher in potash, which encourages flowers and fruiting. Choose one which suits your purpose, or a general one, and one something like this one based on seaweed. Seaweed is full of lots of trace elements aside from those main three, nitrogen, phosphates and potash. It has things like magnesium, molybdenum, boron in it as well. All little trace elements, little vitamins if you like, that plants really appreciate. You can of course make your own. Oh, there are all kinds of muck and magic recipes. But one old one is nettle tea. If you cut nettles, I've got a basket full of them here, nettles and that other old stalwart when it comes to making homegrown liquid feed, which is comfrey. Now comfrey has these large leaves. You get this in your garden, you'll have a devil of a job getting rid of it. It's a rampant spreader. Comfrey and stinging nettles like these, you can make these into comfrey tea or nettle tea. The way to do it, chop them all up, get yourself a bucket of water, and then the nettles go into the bucket. The more you chop them up, the more of the sap you're releasing, pushing them down under the water, and really make a good dense thick mix of nettles. The more you bash them up, the more sap you'll release and the more power you'll give to the nettle tea. We used to make something called blackjack in parks. You know, we lived just below the moors and they used to gather sheep droppings, put them in a piece of hessian, an old sack, drop them into a vat of water, and you'd leave that there and dilute that and feed your plants. Cool. Didn't half pong, and when you've finished with this, having weighed it down with a brick and kept it for about 3 or 4 weeks, you can then decant it into bottles. And you know, with medicine, you know, the worse it tastes, the more good it's doing you. Nettle tea is quite aromatic. They reckon you should dilute it at the rate of 1 in 10 of water. It's not science though, is it really? So if you want to know exactly what you're applying, then stick with a bottled liquid feed, organic, or experiment a bit, comfrey and nettles, but might need a face mask. The first thing to do is to check that the compost in the pot is moist. I watered this about an hour ago, so I know it is. That way the liquid feed can go straight into action rather than scorching the roots. If the soil is dry, the plant is already under stress. It's thinking, where's the water coming from? So when it's nice and damp, that's when you can feed it. This is a brand new rose called the King's Rose, named after the King, King Charles III, with these wonderful striped flowers. It looks like Rosamundi, the old rose, Rosa gallica versicolor, but the thing about Rosamundi is it has one brief flowering season at the end of June, beginning of July. This one, being a modern shrub rose, flowers right the way through summer. You can see all these buds yet to come. But that also means that it will be greedy, it will be hungry. It's 2 capfuls to a canful. It's a bit like pouring doubles with your whiskey or your gin. There's always the temptation to be just a little bit more generous. Well, you mean a little bit, but not much, because it always leads to trouble, doesn't it? That's mixed in there, actually. I don't even need to stir it. And then a really good watering. And this is where you see why it's important to leave a gap between the surface of the compost and the rim of the pot. Because if I hadn't done that, and I couldn't fill it right up like that, look at the bubbles coming out, I wouldn't have been able to give it enough feed. And with a pot like this, where there's about that much gap between the rim and the surface of the compost, that will be enough. As I've said, 1 inch of water will travel downwards 9 inches. So that already damp compost has now been soaked with dilute liquid feed. And if you listen very carefully, you'll hear the plant saying, thank you. But the reward that you get for being kind to your plants by making sure they don't go short of water in containers, and they don't go short of food by feeding them once a week or once a fortnight, and they will repay you with healthy foliage, lustrous green growth and lots of flowers right the way through until the frosts. You'll enjoy that, won't you? I'm adding new videos every week, so if you want to make the most of your garden with all these top tips, subscribe now.